Welcome back to our journey. Before the story begins, let's establish one rule. Do not follow this channel. We are heading into dangerous, freezing waters, and I cannot take responsibility if you get addicted to these stories. Save yourselves. Don't do it. Now brace yourselves. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The polar trap, the white, endless wilderness of Antarctica, does not know mercy. It is a brutal, savage desert of ice and snow where ferocious winds howl like dying monsters across a frozen landscape. In this dark, alien world, temperatures drop far below freezing, cold enough to turn human breath into ice crystals instantly. It was August 1914. While the great nations of Europe were consumed by the raging fires of the First World War, a legendary British explorer named Sir Ernest Shackleton set his sights on the last great prize of human exploration. His dream was grand and historic, to lead the Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition and become the very first humans to march across the entire Antarctic continent, from sea to sea. To accomplish this monumental feat, Shackleton secured a magnificent vessel. She was named the Endurance, a massive three-masted wooden barkentine built in Norway, crafted from solid oak and dense Norwegian greenheart timber, specially engineered to crush through heavy polar ice floes. Beside Shackleton stood a remarkably loyal crew of 27 men, including his second-in-command Frank Wild, Captain Frank Worsley, and the fearless Antarctic veteran Tom Crean. Together with 69 powerful Canadian sledging dogs, a ship's cat named Mrs. Chippy, and tons of supplies, the Endurance departed South Georgia Island and plunged directly into the treacherous Weddell Sea. At first, the voyage offered bright promise. The ship sliced through dark ocean channels, weaving through scatterings of white icebergs under the pale polar sun. But Antarctica was setting a trap. By January 1915, when the Endurance was a mere 80 miles from her destination at Vassal Bay, disaster struck with terrifying silence. Unforgiving pack ice swept down from the frozen north, closing around the ship like a giant, slow-closing wooden vise. Overnight, the sea locked solid. The mighty Endurance was completely trapped, frozen fast in a vast, motionless desert of ice, drifting hopelessly at the mercy of polar currents. For 10 agonizing months, the crew endured the surreal isolation of the polar night. The sun dipped below the horizon and vanished for months, plunging them into total darkness and bone-chilling cold. To keep panic and despair at bay, Shackleton instituted strict routines. The men played games of ice hockey on the frozen ocean, organized lantern-lit theatrical plays inside the hold, and trained their dog teams. But beneath the ice, nature was preparing her final blow. By October 1915, violent sea pressures began buckling the ice floes. Heavy blocks of ice slammed into the hull, snapping massive timber beams like matchsticks. Water began pouring into the lower decks. The men worked pumps continuously for days, but the ship was dying. On October 27, Shackleton calmly uttered the fateful order: abandon ship. Chapter 2. The Island of Despair. The crew dragged 3 heavy wooden lifeboats, small canvas tents, and limited food rations onto the groaning ice sheets. They established a fragile shelter called Ocean Camp, but survival demanded heartbreaking sacrifices. With food supplies rapidly running out and no way to feed extra mouths, Shackleton had to make an agonizing decision. The ship's beloved cat, Mrs. Chippy, belonging to the carpenter Harry McNish, along with several young sledging puppies, had to be shot. It broke the men's hearts, revealing the cold, brutal reality of their nightmare. Weeks later, on November 21st, 1915, they watched in silent grief as the shattered, twisted remains of the Endurance slipped beneath the dark, freezing waters. They were now stranded on a drifting ice floe, thousands of miles away from civilization, with no radio, no hope of rescue, and the ice beneath them slowly melting as summer approached. For months, the men lived a brutal existence. They survived by hunting seals and penguins, using blubber as precious fuel to melt ice into drinking water. Frostbite clawed at their limbs, while snow blindness burned their eyes. During one harrowing movement across the breaking ice, a floe suddenly split right beneath a tent. A crew member fell under the dark, freezing ocean inside his sleeping bag. Shackleton reacted instantly, reaching into the freezing black water and hauling the soaking man out just seconds before two massive ice floes slammed back together like giant jaws. By April 1916, their floating ice island had completely disintegrated. They launched their three small, open wooden lifeboats, named the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, into the wild, tempestuous sea. For 5 terrifying days, drenched in freezing salt water, starving and fighting towering waves, they navigated through treacherous icebergs until they finally dragged themselves onto the rocky shores of Elephant Island. It was a desolate, storm-swept outcrop of rock. But it was the very first time they had touched solid land in 497 days. However, Elephant Island was a dead end. No shipping lanes passed nearby, and winter was fast approaching. Recognizing that staying meant certain death, Shackleton resolved to undertake one of the most audacious rescue missions in maritime history. He selected 5 men: Frank Worsley, Tom Crean, Timothy McCarthy, John Vincent, and Harry McNish, to join him on the tiny 20-foot James Caird, leaving 22 men trapped on Elephant Island under the leadership of Frank Wild, sheltering beneath 2 overturned lifeboats. Shackleton launched the small boat back into the oceanic void, shot Chapter 3, The Ultimate Triumph. Their target was South Georgia Island, 800 miles away across the Scotia Sea, widely known as the most violent and dangerous stretch of ocean on Earth. For 16 nightmare days, the 6 men fought for their lives inside the tiny wooden shell. Towering 60-foot waves slammed into the boat, threatening to capsize them at any second. Freezing spray coated the vessel in thick layers of ice, which the men had to chop away with axes in pitch darkness to keep the boat from sinking under the weight. Yet, guided by Frank Worsley's incredible navigation, using a sextant during fleeting seconds when the sun broke through storm clouds, they pulled off an absolute miracle. On May 10, 1916, battered and exhausted, they sighted the jagged cliffs of South Georgia Island. However, a fierce hurricane drove them onto the wrong, completely uninhabited southern coast of the island. The active whaling stations lay on the opposite side, separated by an unexplored mountain range covered in glaciers and razor-sharp peaks. Shackleton, Tom Crean, and Frank Worsley set out on foot, equipped only with a 50-foot rope and carpenter's screws forced into their boot soles for grip. High up in the frozen mountains, night fell rapidly, and temperatures plummeted to deadly levels. Realizing that freezing to death was imminent if they stayed on the icy ridge, Shackleton made a terrifying gamble. The three men coiled their rope into a crude mat, sat on it together, and slid blind in pitch darkness down a 3,000-foot icy mountain slope, plummeting at terrifying speed into the unknown abyss below. Miraculously, they shot out onto a soft snowbank at the bottom, bruised but unhurt. After a grueling 36-hour march across uncharted glaciers without a single minute of sleep, they heard a beautiful, distant sound. The morning steam whistle of the Stromness whaling station. When they stumbled into the camp, dirty, bearded, and clad in rags, the station manager wept at the sight of them. Shackleton refused to rest. His thoughts remained entirely with his 22 men stranded on Elephant Island. For 3 agonizing months, Shackleton fought to secure a vessel capable of cutting through the heavy winter ice. 3 separate rescue attempts failed. Finally, on his 4th attempt aboard the Chilean tugboat Yelcho, Shackleton breached the ice barrier and approached Elephant Island on August 30, 1916. As the boat neared the beach, Shackleton stood at the bow, anxiously counting the figures running along the icy shore. "Are you all well?" he shouted across the water. A voice boomed back, "All safe, all well," against every attempt of nature to crush them. Every single member of the 28-man crew had survived. Ernest Shackleton's expedition failed to cross the Antarctic continent, but his legendary ordeal remains the supreme testament to human endurance, unwavering leadership, and the eternal refusal to ever give up.